Geneva, March 2025. The room was packed with leaders, journalists, translators, and silent guards lining the walls. Flags of over 30 nations stood proudly behind a long stage. The Global Leadership Summit was supposed to be a place of unity, a space for bold ideas and gentle diplomacy. Instead, it became something no one would ever forget. Ibrahim Traoré, calm but firm, had just been introduced. Standing in his crisp, dark uniform, he greeted the crowd with quiet dignity. At the far end of the panel sat Donald Trump, invited as a former U.S. president to give remarks on global cooperation. But as Traoré took the mic, something shifted. He paused before speaking. He looked directly at Trump, not with anger, but with the sharp eyes of someone who had seen too much pain. The room began to sense something heavy was coming. And then, Traoré asked a single question. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. But the moment the words left his mouth, Donald Trump's face changed. His eyes flickered. His lips tightened. Reporters looked at each other. And for the first time in his career, Donald Trump stood up and walked off stage. The entire room was frozen. The footage wasn't cut. It wasn't edited. No security came forward. No alarms went off. But something had been triggered. Trump's chair remained empty. The former president had vanished behind the curtain, leaving whispers in every language behind him. So what was the question? Traoré had asked, "President Trump, do you remember the village that disappeared after your 2018 military decision in West Africa?" No one saw that coming. The cameras didn't blink, but the crowd did. Some gasped. A few American officials shifted nervously. One translator stopped mid-sentence and looked at his headset as if it had malfunctioned. Traoré didn't elaborate. He just stood still, holding the mic, eyes calm but full of ghosts. He hadn't accused. He had only asked. But those who knew, knew. Villages had been erased, families lost. A decision made on paper had turned into real lives burned into the soil. And now, in front of the world, the man responsible was being held accountable, not with force, but with a memory. Children once lived there. Women once cooked there. And today, it existed only in Traoré's question. And Trump couldn't stay seated. Backstage, security scrambled. Trump was nowhere to be found. One aide, sweating and red-faced, whispered into a walkie-talkie, "Lock the press corridor." But the real shock was out front. Viewers around the world were watching the live stream. Clips had already started circulating on social media. Hashtags like Cherchum Village Question, Chetarnan Traoré Truth, and Chucker Trump Walks Out were exploding. Ibrahim Traoré remained on stage. He didn't chase the moment. He simply placed the microphone down and whispered something that only the front row could hear. "You may silence cameras, but you cannot silence the dead." Then he walked back to his seat. The hall didn't erupt in applause. It didn't need to. Instead, people sat with tears quietly forming. One European diplomat covered her face. A reporter who had served in Burkina Faso clenched his jaw to stop it from trembling. Something far bigger than politics had just happened. This wasn't about policy. It was about forgotten people. And for the first time, their story had pierced through international walls. In real time, before millions. Backstage, Trump's voice finally came through, low and broken. "Get me on the next plane." The village didn't have a name on any map. It was too small, too hidden, too poor for satellites to care. But Ibrahim Traoré remembered it, not from briefings or news reports, but from being there as a young soldier. The village had no electricity. Children studied by candlelight. And yet they laughed. They danced. They shared food with strangers. Then came 2018. Under a US-approved military campaign in the Sahel, a drone strike was authorized on what was mistakenly believed to be a terrorist hideout. But there were no terrorists, only children playing outside a school built from mud and wood. By the time soldiers arrived, only ashes remained. No one took responsibility. No one even said the village's name, because it had none. But Traoré never forgot. That night, after burying what was left of a mother clutching her baby, he made a promise. One day the world will know, and the man who signed that paper will hear their names. That's what made the question so haunting. It wasn't about politics. It was about keeping a promise to the dead. There was one person Traoré always remembered from the village. A little girl, maybe 7, always in a yellow dress, always barefoot. She had followed him everywhere that week, offering him roasted corn, giggling at his uniform, calling him Uncle Captain. On the night before the strike, she had asked, "Will you come back to teach us how to plant trees?" Traoré had smiled. "Of course. I'll bring seeds from Ouagadougou." But he never got the chance. The strike came just before dawn. She was one of the first found in the rubble, still holding a bag of seeds. When Traoré asked Trump the question on that global stage, it wasn't about revenge. It was for her, for the girl in the yellow dress. She had no idea what America was. But her life was still ended by its decision. And now her name, a name the world never knew, echoed through the silence Trump left behind. As Traoré sat in the summit hall, eyes closed, he whispered, "Fatu." That was her name. Fatu. Within hours, the clip was everywhere. CNN, Al Jazeera, BBC, YouTube, TikTok. Even those who didn't know who Ibrahim Traoré was just 24 hours ago now couldn't stop watching him. But it was an old email that changed everything. A former U.S. intelligence officer leaked it anonymously. It was a short internal message dated March 2018. Subject, Village 4055998N, Farn 38512W, cleared for strike. Attachment, drone photo. Note, minimal human presence, possible cell location, green light from D.C. The officer wrote, "We knew there were children. We knew." It went viral in minutes. Suddenly, it wasn't just a moment at a summit. It was a movement. Hashtags now read, her name was Fatu, justice for the village. Traoré truth. In Burkina Faso, people poured into the streets holding yellow fabric in silent marches. And across the world, viewers began to weep for a girl they'd never met, and a man who never stopped carrying her memory. At 3:14 a.m. Burkina Faso time, Ibrahim Traoré's phone buzzed. It wasn't from a government official or a journalist. It was from Fatu's older brother, Moussa. He hadn't spoken to Traoré in years. Through a choked voice, he said, "Captain, I saw the video. I thought the world forgot her. I thought you forgot." Traoré didn't answer right away. He was sitting alone, the summit now behind him, the lights of Geneva glowing outside his hotel window. "I never forgot Moussa," he whispered. "Not a single day." Moussa broke down. No one ever said her name on the news. No one came. Not the UN, not the Red Cross. Just you that night. Just you. And then through the static and emotion he asked, Do you think she saw you today?" Traoré closed his eyes. "I hope so," he replied. "I hope she knows I kept my promise." The call ended in silence. But the emotion didn't. Viewers watching the reenacted call on news segments across the globe wept. It was no longer about politics. It was about a seed of love buried in ashes, finally growing into truth. 3 days later, the Geneva Human Rights Museum made an announcement. A temporary memorial would be created for the unnamed children lost to drone strikes in Africa. At the center of the memorial, a small burned yellow dress, and next to it, a pair of melted plastic shoes labeled Fatu, age 7, Burkina Faso. It was a bold move, but it was real. The exhibit exploded with attention. Flowers piled at the entrance. Parents brought their children to teach them empathy. Veterans walked in silently, holding back tears. Meanwhile, In America, the conversation had shifted dramatically. News outlets were now asking, why did Trump walk off? What exactly happened in that village? Is this the face of Africa's new leadership? For once, the world wasn't laughing at Africa. They were listening. And Traoré, still calm, still grounded, said in an interview, "You do not need money or power to speak the truth. You just need to carry it long enough until someone finally hears it." The world waited. For days, Donald Trump said nothing. No tweets, no press release, just silence. Then, out of nowhere, a press conference was scheduled at Mar-a-Lago. He stepped up to the podium. No red cap, no smirk, just a tired face. He didn't mention Traoré by name. He didn't mention Fatu. But for the first time in his life, his voice cracked on live television. "I made decisions that affected lives far away," he said. "I thought we had all the intelligence. I thought we knew, but maybe we didn't. Maybe we failed." Then he said something no one expected. "There was a little girl. I don't know her name, but I see her now. I can't unsee her." It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't a denial either. Some said it was a PR move. Others said it was genuine. But one thing was certain. Traoré's question had broken through. The former president of the United States had been shaken. Not by war, not by politics, but by the memory of a single child in a yellow dress. In a dusty village not far from Uwahiguya, an elderly woman sat on a wooden bench. She hadn't spoken to anyone in 2 days. Her neighbors said she'd been glued to the television since the summit, eyes wide, lips trembling, clutching an old photo. It was of Fatu. The girl in the yellow dress was her daughter. She was the one who had sewn that dress by hand. She remembered how Fatu had begged her to make it longer. "So it flows when I dance." But after the strike, after the men came with stretchers and shovels, the mother stopped dancing. And for 7 years, no one had ever spoken her child's name. Not in the media, not at the church, not even in government documents. The bodies were too burned, the paperwork too weak. But now, on TV, the mother watched as the world finally heard it. Her name was Fatu. The old woman stood for the first time in hours. She walked to her neighbor's house, knocked on the door, and whispered, "Play it again. I need to hear him say it again." In Paris, a 9-year-old boy named Mehdi saw the video during dinner. He didn't understand politics, but he understood pain. The next morning, he took out his crayons and wrote a letter to Mr. Traoré in Africa. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Traoré, I'm sorry that girl died. I saw you cry without crying. My mom cried a lot. When I grow up, I want to be brave like you. Not to fight, but to tell the truth. Thank you for not forgetting her. Mehdi, age 9." His mother posted it online with a photo of the letter and a caption. "I wasn't ready for this. My son has never written anyone before." The image went viral. Letters poured in from London, São Paulo, Nairobi, Atlanta. Children drew yellow dresses. Teachers held classroom moments of silence. Musicians composed tributes. Poets wrote of seeds and soil. And yet Traoré said nothing to the media. Not because he didn't care, but because he was planting a real tree at the village site, just like he'd promised Fatu. 2 weeks later, Traoré returned to the exact site of the forgotten village. It was quiet. No buildings stood. The wind moved through dry fields. A lone donkey stood near a burnt-out wall. He took off his beret, stepped out of the vehicle, and began to walk. Behind him came trucks, not with weapons, but with tools, bricks, and food. This time, he wasn't there as a soldier. He was there as a builder. One by one, survivors emerged from nearby towns. Musa arrived with his wife and baby. Elder women came holding baskets of dried millet. Young boys ran barefoot just like before. And at the very center of the field, a small wooden sign was planted, "Village of Fatu." Never forgotten. That day, Traoré didn't make a speech. He didn't invite cameras. But one drone, used only for documentation, caught the image of him kneeling beside a tiny sapling, Fatu's tree, placing a yellow ribbon around its base. As the sun set, the village that once had no name was reborn with hers. The next United Nations General Assembly was different. Security was tight. Reporters buzzed, but inside, the room held its breath. Ibrahim Traoré walked in, not with a suit or teleprompter, but wearing his military fatigues and holding one single object, Fatu's melted plastic shoe. He didn't speak for the first minute. The silence became unbearable. Cameras zoomed in. Delegates exchanged looks. Then, finally, he said, "This is what's left when we choose fear over truth, when we mistake children for threats." There was no anger in his voice, only sorrow. He held up the shoe for the world to see and continued, "We gather here each year, talk, clap, issue statements. But children don't need applause. They need protection. They need names." Then he placed the shoe on the podium and stepped away. No applause. Just tears. Ambassadors from Latin America, Asia, and Europe stood slowly, not to clap, but to bow their heads. And somewhere backstage, an aide whispered to a journalist, "This moment will outlive us all." 1 month later, something happened that had never been done in Burkina Faso or anywhere in Africa. A national funeral was held for children whose names were never written down. No bodies, no coffins, just yellow cloths on small white chairs, each representing a lost soul. Fatu's chair was at the front. On it rested a bag of seeds, just like the one she was holding the morning of the strike. People came from every region, Muslims, Christians, animists, and even those with no religion. Everyone mourned together. Ibrahim Traoré stood silently beside Musa and Fatu's mother. She leaned toward him and whispered, "You gave her more than a funeral. You gave her justice." As the choir sang, a breeze swept through the trees. The yellow cloths fluttered like fireflies, and then, unexpectedly, Trump sent a floral wreath. No note, just white lilies, and a single ribbon that read, "For the ones we failed." Some wept harder, because sometimes sorrow is the beginning of something greater. Sometimes a funeral is the birthplace of unity. 3 weeks after the funeral, Traoré received a letter, handwritten, mailed from Florida. It was from a former American drone operator. The letter read, "Captain Traoré, I was the one who pressed the button that day. I was told it was a clean target. I trusted the data. But I saw the replay. I saw the children. I saw her yellow dress. I haven't slept since. When you asked that question at the summit, I was watching. I fell to my knees. Please believe me, I never wanted this, if it means anything. I planted a tree in my yard. I named it Fatu. I am so sorry. Alex M., former U.S. Air Force." Traoré sat with the letter for hours. Then he replied with one line, "Plant a second tree, for the next child we must save together." That message was shared online. Within 48 hours, people in over 61 countries planted trees named Fatu. Children held signs saying, "I am Fatu." And slowly, the world began to shift, not from policy, but from pain. In a small school in Ohio, a 5th-grade teacher named Mrs. Bennett showed her students the moment Traoré asked his question, and Trump walked off stage. No one moved. One boy, usually restless, started crying quietly. A girl raised her hand and asked, "Why did no one help her?" Mrs. Bennett didn't know how to answer. That night, every child wrote a letter to Fatu. The next day, the teacher mailed all 24 letters to the Burkina Faso embassy. One of the letters simply read, "Dear Fatu, I wish we could have saved you, but I will remember you every time I see the sun." Emma, age 10. The embassy forwarded the letters to Ibrahim Traoré's office. He read every one, and then for the first time in weeks, he wept. Not from anger, not from grief, but from hope. Because the youngest hearts were now carrying Fatu's name forward, just as he had. And the world was no longer asking, "Who is Ibrahim Traoré?" They were asking, "How do we become more like him?" 1 year later, Traoré returned to the same summit where it all began. But this time, he didn't come alone. He brought Fatu's mother, dressed in white and yellow. As they stepped onto the stage together, the entire room stood. No music, no anthem, just silent respect. Traoré approached the microphone. He held up Fatu's photo and said, "One child changed the world, not because she shouted, not because she ruled, but because she died forgotten, and someone finally remembered." Then he turned to Fatu's mother and said softly, "Now they all know her name." She nodded through tears, and at that moment, a sea of yellow ribbons appeared in the crowd, delegates from every continent wearing them on their chests. Somewhere backstage, a U.S. aide whispered, "This isn't politics anymore. This is redemption." In his last appearance for the summit, Ibrahim Traoré was asked by a young journalist, "What would you say to Donald Trump now if he were here?" Traoré looked down, then up, and said, "I would say, you were not the enemy. Silence was, and you broke it, even if too late." The room went still. Then he held up one final letter, sent by a child in a refugee camp. "Captain Traoré, I don't have a home, but when I see you, I feel like I do." Tears streamed down his face as he read it. And the journalist, voice trembling, asked, "What's the legacy of Fatu?" He smiled through tears. "That no child dies nameless again. Not on my watch, not ever again." If you cried, even a little, if Fatu's story touched your heart, if you now admire Ibrahim Traoré even more than before, please do one thing right now. Comment below. Fatu will never be forgotten. Like this video if you believe truth is stronger than power. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories that make the world feel again. Share this video with one person who still believes in humanity. Because sometimes one question can change everything, and sometimes one child can awaken the world.